We did a series for CNN on death row stories. Pays the bills, runs a little bit of a profit. So those kinds of things can be useful.
Where do you get your talent from?
There's plenty of talent. We just send out the word.
Do you have any kind of internship program?
We do have an internship program. It's successful in the sense that we notice people. I mean, we're doing better now than we used to in terms of trying to find a way to educate kids rather than just have them do transcripts. And we do end up hiring a lot of the best ones. They get hired up into the system.
Herzog gave a lot of his time. Do you know about this? Whenever he does a film, he brings people onto the set and then sort of tutors and mentors them for each film. It's obviously pretty selective, both in his aesthetics, but also.
So how does it work? I mean, you just shadow Werner? Is that what you do?
Yeah. He sends out on his website with every film the description of what he's looking for, and then you send a brief description of who you are, what you do, and a 5-minute clip of what you've done. I mean, the worst thing that could happen, you have a bunch of mini-me Herzogs out there making films now.
Could be worse.
Yeah. I liked your comment about the voiceover. Yeah, he pulls it off. He's amazing.
Well, he's not the only one. The comment about that is stupid.
Yeah. Like, there's not a formula.
There's no formula.
He keeps it to a minimum. Like in the...
I don't know that Werner keeps it to a minimum. I mean, did you see the Antarctica film? It's like all over that film.
Yeah.
So sometimes he goes too far. He finds a way, I mean, it's not just for exposition, but also to ruminate, and I love it. I mean, it's funny, it's easy to parody, but it's good.
Can I hear your parody of when he looks into the grizzly's eyes?
No.
I looked into the grizzly's eyes, I saw nothing. Right. Nothing. Oh no, that's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Let me get Herzog.
No.
Have you seen Fury Road yet? This is the Australian tested.
I thought it was good. I thought Charlize Theron was great.
Yeah. It's one of these films that opens itself to a double reading. You can just watch it for action, or you can watch it for pretty deep thinking about the endings. The Anthropocene. What's vital, what's necessary, what's not in people's lives. Do you go it alone? Do you go as a community? I mean, Miller's pretty deep thinker on some of that stuff. The Four Fluids.
Right.
Who would have thought mother's milk was like one of the vital fluids?
I don't know. I thought that was pretty flicky. I mean, I got it, but I just didn't. I didn't know how deep it was. I kind of prefer the Road Warrior in that regard.
The very first one, or the
no? Mad Max was just kind of like
a
movie.
Student film.
It was it was a revenge movie. Road Warrior was more thoughtful that way, I thought. There were a lot of ideas here, but they were just... I liked the movie.
Yeah.
I didn't find the critique that coherent.
But also the role of, how the disabled were at the top of the pyramid. Everybody had some disability who was running things.
Right.
I mean, the healthiest people were the people who were down at the bottom. And that was... I'm still trying to figure that one out. Emotional, physical cripples were running the show.
Right.
So what was the question you didn't get asked today that you were ready to answer and thought should have been asked?
I don't know. I'm honestly, I'm bad with those questions. I don't know. Like the question that was asked at the end, like what question would you have asked James Brown? I thought, I should have given that question more thought.
You think James Brown would have liked the documentary?
Maybe. Al Sharpton thought it was absolutely got him. Got Brown.
Right.
Sharpton loved it. So much so we're doing a film about him now. He's a fascinating character.
Well, you caught him with the natural fro at one point in his life.
Well, James Brown actually asked him to wear his hair like him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And said, keep it that way until I die, which is what he did.
So why'd you shoot at Square Box? Was it because of the television? Was that ratio, or?
It's not all square box. The interviews are not 185 but 179. But we elected not to stretch or to lose a lot of the imagery of the original archive, and the original archive is all 4:3. So if you blow it up, you lose about 35% of the image. And so we elected not to do that. So it has to do with the fact that so much of that is older archive.
But you basically re-edited a lot of the stock footage. Like, what's the footage that you got? What's the ratio amount that you edited? Would you say? Could you stick with what you got, or do you feel like you had
What do you mean?
Well, like when you got, say, like a 5-minute clip, how much of that would you edit down to make it your stuff?
Oh, massively.
I'm always interested in that because the attention spans now have shrunk. Like, originally an edit would be maybe 30 seconds for television, or even longer. But now it's got to be 5 seconds or less.
I'm not sure. That's what everybody says. I'm not sure that's true. I think it's a kind of it depends on what the rationale is. I know a lot of kids who like to watch the Wachowski films, and those are not cutty. They're hallucinatory. They draw you in, but they're not cutty. So I think this idea kids have short attention spans. They do and they don't. I mean, they watch a lot of stuff online, and and consume a lot of very short stuff, including Vine. But then they'll also sit down and watch a 2.5-hour movie.
I think there is
from start to finish.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between fiction and non-fiction. There have been studies showing that an average newscast, for instance, we watch CBS Nightly Report. In the 60s, the soundbite was 30 seconds. If you watched it in the late 80s, early 90s, it was just down to 3 to 5 seconds, the cuts. So maybe there is a difference between the fictional form or long form.
I mean, I was watching this. There's not a lot of long moments in terms of somebody talking at great length about something or other. But partially that was because a lot of the film was cut to music.
Yeah, the rhythm is incredible.
So
it's like when the drummer's talking about hitting the move on the beat.
Well, and there was a lot of work to be done in terms of being able to cut the interviews so that they work with the rhythm of the music. And that there's actually a rhythm to the interviews that matches the music. That was done.
So you basically edited it to the music even when there wasn't music on the screen, or?
Yeah. But it's more complicated than that. I mean, you want to try to preserve the music and the clip, and there's the sense of what they're saying. But you want to try to make it work so that because it was supposed to be a musical.
I think one of the best things you pulled off was no matter how hard you try, when you show people dancing, they usually look kind of goofy. But this film, it looks authentic.
Yeah. I mean, the most riveting footage in the film.
The Prince Albert Hospital's here.
The most riveting footage in the film is the Tammy show. And those are very long takes. It's not cutty at all, but it's James Brown just doing unbelievable, and also a lot of it are wide shots. It's James Brown just doing an unfucking believable performance.
So I know you dealt with this question already, but did Mick Jagger have final cut privileges on when he was on screen?
No. I mean, I did not have final cut on this movie, so this was not a final cut movie.
Oh, really?
No. But he wasn't very intrusive. He had some strong notes on a couple of things, but mostly he was right, so I didn't have much of a problem.
You seem pretty intent on dispelling the notion that you followed hot on the heels of Brown and came out looking second.
Well, I think it was a myth. I think he's right. I think it was. I mean, we still made the point. I mean, if you look at Mick Jagger, he looks pallid compared to James Brown. So I think he was honest about that.
Yeah.
But, you know, legends are hard to revise. And that was a legend. It just didn't happen to... It was a good legend. It just didn't happen to be true.
I had no idea he had stolen so much of that chicken strutting from Brown until I saw it juxtaposed like that.
Gee, you saw what?
Until I saw it, like, back to back, you know.
But you see him, I mean, he's just so... Particularly at that moment in time, it's just like, oh, you spread your legs, you do a little split. I mean, it looks sick compared to Mr. Brown. You know, he was learning, but he hadn't learned yet. In his own way, I mean, that was the coming of the new music. I mean, in his own way, it was you know, you're watching Mick Jagger perform, it's impressive. But he was no James Brown, as he himself said.
So, I have noticed in your films, they often have particular lighting for the interviews. This one had like a bordello look.
Yeah, there was
the red in the back.
Well, it wasn't always red, but there were a lot of primary colors.
Yeah.
So rather than some of the films are more muted, the colors. The color in this film was purposefully not muted. You know, it was garish. That was intentional. Not only how you light, but also how you time it, you know, after the fact. Even the archive was, I almost always insist that that black and white material be black and white. In this case, I colored most of it.
Well, Sharpton looked like he just come out of the bordello that James Brown used to work in.
Yeah. Well, they all, I mean, the lighting scheme in all of them, I mean, it's full, they're all full of color.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the other films, since I haven't seen them yet. I'm sorry. I've seen, obviously, WikiLeaks and all. I've seen everything you made, I think, except for the new ones.
What, Going Clear and the Jobs film.
Yeah, you must be feeling a little bruised by now, aren't you?
What?
I mean, you've been under attack. You're not feeling a little battered, bruised, or you thrive on that, or?
I mean, so far, the Jobs film hasn't been released yet. So I've gotten some attacks from Apple, but you know, it hasn't gone into broad release. And some fanboys, when we showed it at South by Southwest, reacted pretty harshly. But some people really liked it. One thing that the We Steal Secrets taught me was how to take a punch. Or how to take a cheap shot, I should say.
Now, the thing that always floored me is, like, everybody in the audience is a filmmaker. They know how to do it better. My favorite is like, well, why didn't you film X doing Y? The guy was dead because you weren't there.
I get that more from critics. It's like, he neglected to shoot X or Y. It's like, really? I'm not sure I neglected. You know, maybe you wanted me to, but I didn't choose to.
I do focus groups a lot. Do you do focus groups?
During the cut, yeah, while we're cutting, I do. I do questionnaires and everything.
Yeah, I find it useful.
I do too.
It's hard on the ego though. I get very defensive. I used to get very defensive.
Yeah, I don't get defensive anymore. In fact, I have to kind of train my peeps not to get defensive during the Q&A process. But we end up learning much more from the questionnaires. People feel a little bit more free to express their opinion. And what we're usually looking for, everybody's going to have an opinion. And some people think, oh, this is shit, or I didn't like this, or whatever. But you look in those, for me anyway, for those focus groups, you look at what's consistent.
Yeah. I also look for the one that comes out of left field.
Yeah, maybe.
Like when we did this film Human Terrain, where we embedded with the Marines before they went over. They're doing this cultural training, and one of the guys who I brought in got recruited and got killed in Afghanistan. So we had to, obviously make a decision. We include him in the story. It was also very personal. And the first time we showed the rough cut with him in it, we had his mother in it. And this one woman in the back of the audience says, "You got to take the mother out of the film." And I was kind of like instantaneously angry. Like, how can you say that? It's like the emotional punch, everything, But I realized she had a point, because the mother negated the intellectual, the emotion negated the intellectual critique that was being made against the program, against the son. So I learned a lot from that. But have you had moments like that where someone in the audience has made you rethink a whole edit or film direction?
Yeah, but not in such a profound way. I mean, I feel pretty strongly about including unresolvable contradictions in the film. So if there's a point and it's being interfered with by something that somebody says, I'm often very perverse about making sure that we include it in order to interfere with the point. But I can think of some instances where in the Scientology film, one of the people we profile is the former number 2 of Scientology. When he left the church, he practiced certain aspects of the religion outside of the confines of the church, particularly auditing, which is the Scientology form of therapy. And we had a sequence of him in the film of him doing an audit session, which I found interesting. But most people emotionally reacted very strongly against it, because it seemed to them that he hadn't really escaped the church and he was going back. He was in the process of leaving, but not knowing enough about the auditing aspect of it, they just saw the symbol of the oppressiveness of the church.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was something that I wanted to leave in for the reasons I just stated, but I finally found that it was just too much for people, and it was such a devastating blow that it wasn't worth it. So,
well, part of it is the phenomenon of the apostate, the person who loses the religion, tends to be even more fervent about what they take up next. The disbeliever becomes a believer in something else even more vociferously. In the way, like the neocons. A lot of them were Trotskyists,
No, I get that, but this wasn't a case of that. This is a guy who, to the audience, didn't seem like he was leaving what he had left behind, because he was still doing the auditing, right? I mean, he was the auditor, he was the guy in control.
So he's reversing the power relationship.
Well, no, he was always an auditor.
Oh, he was?
I mean, he was an auditor inside the church. But it's just the fact that the audience needed to believe, from an emotional standpoint, that he had left. And that he had left everything behind.
Well, let me tell you, this relates then to the question I thought you dodged today. Because a lot of your films, and I think why Rachel asked you this question, shows an acute sensibility towards the how to put it, the less than obvious, the psychological, what's happening underneath, And yet the one question where she probed you on that, you dodged.
And what was that question?
Where she was asking you about, like, okay, you've done all these films about these white guys your age, which is the psychoanalytical question. Even though James Brown isn't your age and he's not white.
Neither is Fela Kuti.
Exactly.
Fela Kuti's dead, and so is James Brown.
So maybe she had an axe to grind, whatever, but you did try to avoid it a little bit. So. Do you think the
I
cycle?
mean, I think she was right about something else, which is that almost all my films are about men. So you could make that critique. And in fact, people in my office often make that critique, like, dude, why don't you make some films about women? Well, okay, that's fair enough. You know, but Rachel also pointed out that Julian Assange is not my generation, and neither is Lance Armstrong, really.
Right. I think the age thing was interesting and not as important as what I think she was trying to do, is get you to open up a little about the what extent you identify with the psychological makeup of your informant, of your subject. I think that's what she was doing. Power, ambition.
Well, I try to identify with them. I think if you don't identify with them in some way, then, you know, because I did, you know, when she asked me about, you know, she said at the very beginning, I can't remember the phrase she used, but you're like a monster tracker.
Yeah.
And I said, which I believe, is that I don't think I am that. I'm not interested in monsters. And so, to that extent, I do try to put myself instead. And I'm interested. I mean, you know, Steve Jobs, you haven't seen that film, but I work hard and I push other people who work pretty hard. And I don't apologize for that much in myself. But I also don't think, you know, I think I can also draw a distinction and say that I also don't humiliate people the way that Steve Jobs does, or did. So,
plus you don't dress it up in New Age doxology.
I mean, he took all the superficial trappings of the counterculture and left everything else behind, which is one of the things I'm interested in that film. So yeah, maybe I dodged Rachel's question, but I didn't know what more to make of it. It's like, I do try to empathize with these characters and get inside their heads, but I wouldn't take it too far. It's like, what is it about my childhood that draws me to these particular characters? Maybe I could examine that more, but so far that hasn't taken me any place interesting.
Not only that, it's also ambiguous. Like, you know, everybody is loved too much or too little, you know? And the other factor, too, is everybody who shows those type of levels of accomplishment and achievement know how to tap their dark side. You know, our creativity comes from our dark side, I think. You know,
well, I've heard that before. I think it comes from both places, to be honest with you. But I think that if you're not in touch with the dark side, then there's a problem.
Right. It's a very Jungian notion. It depends on your own personality trait. But in general, it's the people who have some self-awareness that don't end up hurting other people with their dark sides. It's because, like, you know, someone like a Hitler, it's kind of internalized into resentment.
If only we had encouraged him to take more painting lessons.
Exactly.
Right.
It's one of those. I'm really interested in the what-if questions. You know, what if Jobs had like, you know, better experience on LSD, you know?
By all accounts, his experience on acid was pretty good. But, I mean, you know, there's the kind of obvious thing with Jobs, which is that he was both rejected and indulged as a child, which left him with a chip on his shoulder and a view that he was beyond anybody's judgment.
Yeah. Well, before we get kicked out, I got to ask you about the film that I think is going to like withstand the test of time, and in my own circle of friends, they're absolutely delighted you did it. The Ken Kesey.
Oh, the Magic Trip?
Yeah, I mean, to save those films, tell me a little bit about what was involved in that and why you were compelled to make the film.
For the exact reason you put in your question. I mean, I was interested in making that film because I heard that there was 16 millimeter film of that trip. I just read Robert Stone wrote a piece in the New Yorker, and I thought, oh my God, there's footage of that trip? I mean, I should have known that, but I didn't really know it. And then it was a lot of it was a kind of a restoration project. And it was a funny project because so much of what's interesting about Wolf's non-fiction novel, is that he's getting inside of people's heads and actually showing that footage in a way is almost getting outside rather than inside. Because much of that trip was, pretty grubby and dirty and long and tiring. Except for that one sequence we did where we animated, Kesey's recording of his own acid trip. We don't get inside their visions. And we're not making the kind of interpretive comment that Wolf makes in his book. But I thought it was really important to show that, and there are aspects of it that are, I think are fascinating because that's a moment of time that's on the edge of a massive change.
Plus it shows the continuity between the beats and Kesey.
It shows the continuity of the beats and the Kesey.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize
right. Well, because Cassidy, and then they hook up with them, with Ginsberg and Kerouac in New York. And Kerouac by that time is a bitter old drunk. I love that film. A lot of people who like a lot of my films hated it. I mean, hated it because they felt that, who are these fucking people? All this shit is going on in the South, right. In Vietnam, and all they're doing is hanging out and dropping acid and tootling around. What the fuck is that? There's work to be done. But I think that's kind of what Kesey was saying was...
Okay. We're going to wrap it up. But the other continuity is that between your films, it was the fact that, these guys were in garages making computers. They were also dropping acid.
Right.
There's a connection between Kesey and Jobs. There's a connection between Kesey and the politics.
But they come from, Jobs is younger than Kesey. But Jobs came out of the counterculture, and that was a time when everybody was questing, when everybody was trying to see if there was a different way. And they were exploring. That's what Kesey was doing. He was saying, you got to play. And you got to explore. And play to him was important. It was magic. It was a way of, because when he did his famous, when he had his famous moment, when he went to the anti-Vietnam rally, which sadly there was no footage of, but he shows up in a mock tank and mocks the kind of strident military rhetoric of the student protesters. He was saying, you're just doing what they're doing. You're just doing it in a point of view.
And this is before
frankly, but frankly, that was my rap. That was my view of Julian Assange. It was like Julian acts like, or at his worst, not his best, and I think he did great shit, but at his worst, he acts like he's a secret agent, like he's a CIA agent.
Right.
Fuck you, I'm not interested in following another CIA agent, even if he claims to be on the right side. But he does all this spy stuff. Intel. He's always talking about Intel. Fuck you with Intel. How about Enlightenment? That would be more interesting to me. So,
well, Foucault has a great line. I'd much rather be a jester than a priest.
Right.
So, he thinks it's a more effective way to turn power, on its head.
That's kind of what Kesey was trying to do, I think. And honestly, I found the other thing I found about the Magic Trip footage was, Wolf talked all about the trip across from west to east. And I found in some way much more affecting the footage on the way back.
when they weren't being driven by Cassidy, it wasn't so fast because they weren't being, led by a speed freak. but also there was a sense of engagement with nature and contemplation. It was quite moving to me. And you didn't see that on the way over.
Yeah.
There was more aggressive playing, which is fun, but there was so anyway.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Yep.